All right. Hi, everybody, and welcome to another series of the OutCenter Talks Medicaid. I am your program coordinator, Alex Cross, and today we have a fantastic guest joining our program leads, Karen and Kate, as we talk about Medicaid in Michigan. I will not be involved in the conversation today, but that's okay because everyone else is just as, if not more, exciting to talk to. So, with that, Karen and Kate, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Sure. My name's Karen Moldovan, and this is my partner, Kate Mode, and we are heading up the Medicaid project for the OutCenter. And
we're both nurses.
We try. And so here we are, we're back again, and we have asked Jay Kaplan to assist us with talking about Medicaid and for the LGBTQ community and people of color. And so if you could step in and introduce yourself and kind of tell us what you do for the ACLU, that would be great.
Sure. Well, thank you, Karen. Hi, everybody. I'm Jay Kaplan, and I'm the staff attorney for the ACLU of Michigan's LGBT project. We started this project back in 2001. We cover the entire state of Michigan, and we focus on LGBT-related issues in our state.
Fantastic. And let's see. Let's move right to gender reassignment surgery.
Sure.
Because we know that it's considered cosmetic and not medically necessary by Medicaid. Could you give us some history about the reassignment surgery and the laws and evolution over time? A little bit about that?
Sure. Well, I think it's important to keep in mind that due to the pervasive discrimination against the transgender community, as a result, you find that disproportionately transgender people are more likely than the general population to be living below the poverty level. And when you look at communities of color, the African American community, as well as the Latinx community, even those statistics are even higher. And so many of these populations have to rely on Medicaid for their health insurance. And of course, in Michigan, we have the expanded Medicaid program, which has allowed many more people to have health insurance coverage. And for many years, well, I just need to backtrack for a second. The way it works with Michigan Medicaid is they contract with private insurance companies like Molina, like Priority Health, to serve as Medicaid programs in addition to being private insurers. And what we saw for many years is that these insurers would have policies that would have blanket exclusions for covering transgender related medical care. We're not going too far back, 6, 7, 8 years ago, where hormone therapy wouldn't be covered and certainly surgical procedures wouldn't be covered. We've made some progress in that area as a result of different policy changes at the federal level, as a result of the Affordable Care Act passing. And in 2019, Michigan Medicaid's program made clear to all their contractual insurance companies that they cannot single transgender people out for discrimination. The challenge, though, that we have nowadays in terms of getting these Medicaid insurance companies to cover trans-related surgeries is they will often argue that the procedure is not medically necessary. So they don't have a blanket exclusion, but they'll say it's not medically necessary, it's cosmetic, despite all the evidence that is presented from the individual, from their medical team, demonstrating that this is a medically necessary procedure in order to treat the symptoms of gender dysphoria. And that's the frustrating thing. That's where we seem to have gotten stuck now. These insurance companies, they have their own policies, and they tend to ignore what the recipient is presenting, through their medical doctors, and they tend to ignore kind of what the experts say with regards to transgender health related care. So you have to go through various administrative appeals processes. It can drag out things. And it can be a very frustrating, experience for transgender individuals.
Well, what about the laws?
Yeah.
mean,
Well, we know that under the Affordable Care Act, there's a provision, it's called Section 1557, and it says that health insurance companies cannot discriminate on the basis of sex. And we have seen our federal courts interpret that category of sex as covering transgender people. Last year, the United States Supreme Court held in the case of Bostock versus Clayton County, Georgia, that when you discriminate against LGBT people in employment, you're doing it because of sex, and that violates civil rights laws that prohibit sex discrimination. And we have seen other courts look at discrimination against LGBT people in other contexts and have held that that is discriminatory. So I think we can extrapolate the Bostock decision and we can say this also applies to health insurance companies. And just recently in Michigan, the Michigan Court of Claims held that transgender people are protected under our state civil rights laws, which prohibit discrimination not only in employment, housing, and education, but also public accommodations. And an insurance program we maintain is a public accommodation. So clearly, when these Medicaid programs, if they're trying to, or they're aiming to treat transgender people differently under the law, that would violate our civil rights laws.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for that. What's the next one? Okay. Let's see. Well, what advice do you have for gays trying to navigate Medicaid?
Well,
I'm
sorry. What advice do? Yeah, resources. Well, so it's going to be very important for any member of the LGBT community when you, and particularly in the transgender community, because there have been so many challenges with making sure that that the insurance company understands what it means to be transgender and what the medical experts in the field say. My advice is to make sure that you have very strong supporting documents from your medical team. In other words, you want to make clear that if you're going for surgery, that your surgeon in a letter makes it absolutely clear that this is a medically necessary procedure in order to treat gender dysphoria. You want to, and so if you're working with a therapist, if you're working with a mental health counselor, your psychologist, your endocrinologist, you want to make sure you have documentation from all of them supporting this. You also want to make reference to it's an organization, it's called the World Professional Association of Transgender Health. WPATH is the acronym, and they come out with standards of care, which are viewed as kind of the experts in the field of transgender health care. And you want to demonstrate how what you are requesting corresponds to the WPATH standards of care. So I always argue, documentation, have your documents there. Many times, it's very clear that someone needs this procedure, but maybe what they provided to the insurer, maybe what their surgeon provided wasn't enough. One of the challenges is that, for instance, let's say I'm going to have vaginoplasty surgery. I want to have vaginoplasty surgery. There's only one entity in the state, U of M's program. And sometimes it's challenging because these surgeons are so busy making sure you get the very specific documentation from that surgeon. In other words, explains in a letter why this is a medically necessary procedure.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
So
And does that generally facilitate them getting coverage? Those letters?
Sometimes it does. Sometimes it does. Years ago we had big problem getting hormone therapy covered. That's not an issue anymore. They will cover hormone therapy. Where we're still running into problems is the issue of surgery. They no longer can say, we're not covering any surgical procedures. We don't exclude that because they've been told by the state that's discriminatory, but they will argue that something's not medically necessary and they'll go by their standards. So for instance, dealing with one Medicaid insurance company, they view all forms of facial feminization surgery as cosmetic. Uh, and they don't have an understanding for a transgender woman. Feminizing the face is not about looking beautiful. It's about having facial features that are congruent with your gender identity and helping you be able to function in the world and not being always outed as a transgender woman. And so many times their guidelines with regards to a facial feminization procedure, it does not address how do you treat gender dysphoria. And so you hope you can educate the insurer, you hope you can persuade them to do the right thing. If they don't do the right thing, then you're going to have to appeal, and you might have to go before an administrative law judge, and or there's a regulatory arm in the state of Michigan. It's called the Department of Insurance and Financial Services. So right now I'm working on 2 appeals to that entity. So the acronym is DIFS. We haven't gotten a decision yet. I'm hoping that they will come up with a decision saying, you know what, Medicaid insurer, you can't just go by your own guidelines just because you have those guidelines. You have to really have an understanding about what it means to be transgender, and you can't disregard what, the evidence and the studies that have been done and what the experts are saying in this field. But unfortunately, that still happens.
I see. And this is usually something that you must do for the patient. The client doesn't usually do this themselves.
Well, they have to work with their medical team, right? I mean, the client, if they have knowledge of how all this works and they feel comfortable with it, certainly they can talk on their own, with their medical team and say, listen, I'm going to need this, this, and that in order to support this pre-authorization request for the insurance company to cover a procedure. But many times it just can be such a daunting thing because many people are in pain. And these surgical procedures can help alleviate the pain associated with being diagnosed with gender dysphoria. And they need some assistance. And I think if we had more medical entities that were performing these procedures, there wouldn't be so much stress on U of M in terms of working with particular surgeons and getting all the documents. You'd have other places to go to. I've worked with other medical entities, particularly in the area of facial feminization surgery, and I found, the doctor that I'm working with, she's been terrific about providing the supporting documents and gearing, what she is saying towards the idea of trying to get the insurance company to approve this procedure. A lot of it involves, good working relationships with all the different players.
Absolutely. Right. And I'm sure when they see your name and that the fact that, they've seen you before. And so the insurance companies, they know what to expect, and you make it easier for the client. And so
I wish I could say that when they see my name or the ACLU, that all of a sudden they turn around and they reverse themselves and do the right thing. But unfortunately, that doesn't happen very often. I've worked with some insurance companies, we're raising the same arguments, the same briefing. And what I find often is that the insurance companies are not responding to what has been submitted in support of the coverage. They're just like, they're kind of this tunnel vision. This is our policy. We're just going to keep repeating our policy. And we're not going to respond to the things or the studies that have been provided and what these doctors have said. And that's incredibly, incredibly frustrating.
Okay. So wondering if Bostic will help them change their policies, that decision.
Yeah. So there is a very good chance that in the state of Michigan, our highest court, the Michigan Supreme Court, will eventually be applying the Bostock decision as to our civil rights laws. And if they hold, yes, this means that LGBT people are protected against discrimination on the basis of sex, that makes it very clear. Because so the way this works, when you say that it's discriminatory, you're saying, okay, insurance company, you're covering medically necessary procedures for people who are not transgender, who are cisgender, but you're refusing to cover medically necessary procedures for people who are transgender. And thus, that's where the discrimination comes in. So I am hopeful as we make more progress towards LGBT civil rights that these insurance companies will understand that they cannot do this. We filed a civil rights complaint against a particular Medicaid insurer, and we reached a settlement with them after several years, and they finally agreed to cover a surgical procedure for my client who is transgender. And we were able to agree to terms that were very, very favorable for the client, and provided her with a number of options and how she could obtain her surgery and the timeline for getting the surgery. But it was a 3-year process in terms of filing a complaint with the Michigan Department of Civil Rights. And people who need this surgery, it's very difficult to have that delayed and to have to go through all the different appeals processes and starting over each time.
So disruptive to your job, to your life, just everything.
Very much so, very much so. Many times, I'm referring to some of the transgender clients I work with. They talk about the pain that they feel, the pain knowing that their true essence is this gender, and yet they were assigned a different gender, and they, and when they see themselves visually, how that doesn't comport with how they see themselves, and how painful both psychologically and physically that is for them, and how I don't, in quotes, I'll put the word, how desperate many times that people feel for this surgery.
Wow, that's so sad, really.
Can I ask a question going back to something?
Sure.
If you don't mind. So gender dysphoria is one of the worst feelings in the whole world that I've ever experienced. I've experienced a lot of depression, and I've experienced a lot of other chronic issues, and none of it pales in comparison to gender dysphoria. That is not what I wanted to jump in to say. I wanted to ask why, if you could go through the process a little bit of why the Supreme Court, the Michigan Supreme Court needs to look at Bostock, and why we need to go to Michigan Supreme Court levels for insurance-based concerns. And is that different for private insurance versus, a public good like Medicaid? Those 3 questions, I'm sorry.
Sure, no, those are all great questions. Well, we want, it's interesting with our courts, our state courts, for the first time, in almost 2 decades, we have a progressive majority on the Michigan Supreme Court. And there's an opportunity, hopefully, to get some favorable decisions with regards to LGBT rights, something that we never had before in our state for a very, very long time. Why we want to expand the Bostock decision is because Michigan is one of 29 states that have civil rights laws that don't explicitly mention sexual orientation and gender identity. So we want to make sure that we find these protections under the category of sex. Doesn't mean that we don't want to amend our state civil rights laws, because if we explicitly put in those words, then we don't have to rely on courts to do interpretation. But until we get to that point, we want the courts to find that LGBT people are indeed protected. So right now in Michigan, there is a case, it's called Rauch World versus the Michigan Department of Civil Rights. And it involves 2 situations. One, there was a lesbian couple that was, they wanted to rent this facility for their wedding, and they were turned down by the owner because he said that he would not rent to same-sex couples. And then there was a transgender woman who had contacted a business that provides electrolysis services, and they refused to do so for her because she's transgender. So each of them filed sex discrimination complaints with the Michigan Department of Civil Rights, which began investigating their complaints. And these 2 businesses turned around, they sued the Michigan Department of Civil Rights, saying, our civil rights laws do not protect LGBT people. And so when you sue a state entity like the Michigan Department of Civil Rights, it first goes through the Michigan Court of Claims. And the Michigan Court of, I hope I don't get too technical, but the Michigan Court of Claims, they held that applying Bostock meant that transgender people were covered under our state civil rights laws, because our courts have never looked at the issue about whether transgender people are covered under state civil rights laws. When it came to sexual orientation, gay and lesbian people, the court said, you know, we had a case in the Michigan Court of Appeals 22 years ago called Barber versus the Department of Social Services, where we held that gay and lesbians are not covered under civil rights laws. Now, Bostock might have changed things, but we, Court of Claims, don't have the legal authority to overrule a decision like that. So what you really need to do is to appeal that part up to the Michigan Supreme Court, because they can overturn the former 1998 case Barber, given the Bostock decision. So that's what's happening right now. They're requesting the Michigan Supreme Court to take that up. If they do take it up, and if they do decide to overrule the Barber case, that will mean we will have a court decision making it clear that LGBT people are protected under our civil rights laws, and we can use those protections to challenge the practices of not only Medicaid insurance companies, but also private insurance companies refusing to cover medically necessary procedures for transgender individuals.
Great explanation. Thank you.
Thank you. I
Fantastic.
know it's a little long-winded.
No, it's good. We need to hear it.
Very good.
That's why we asked you to be with us today.
Thank you.
Fantastic. So I guess what do you see in the future for now that we have a much more progressive, Congress and president, administration? What do you see coming down the pike as far as what might be happening for LGBTQ people and trans,
People
Yeah.
of color.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad that you mentioned about the new Biden administration, because one thing that I hadn't mentioned was on his first day in office, President Biden issued an executive order and directing every department of the federal government to apply the Bostock decision to its policies and practices within a 100-day period. So that includes the Department of Health and Human Services that would oversee, in terms of the Affordable Care Act and fully funded Medicaid programs. And so I think we're going to have probably some more specific guidance with regards, to the idea that transgender people cannot be discriminated against. You are correct. We have U.S. House of Representatives and our Senate, which has a Democratic, a progressive majority. So there's an opportunity, hopefully, to pass. There's an Equality Act, which would be the first federal comprehensive federal civil rights bill to cover LGBT people. The problem in the U.S. Senate, though, is there's a filibuster rule, and anytime you have major legislation, you have to have 60 votes in order to move it forward. We have a 50-50 tie in the Senate with the vice president breaking the tie. So the issue is, are there other ways to try to pass or to get an exception to the filibuster in order to pass that federal civil rights law? In Michigan, we are also fortunate that we have a governor, an attorney general, and a secretary of state, all who are supportive of LGBT rights. The challenge is, though, our legislature, our state legislature is in the control of the Republican Party, and their leadership has refused thus far to push forward any pro-LGBT legislation, including amending our state civil rights bills. And then the other, so we have a very small window period of time to try to get things done. In 2022, U.S. House of Representatives will be up for re-election. We will be having state elections. Our governor will be up for re-election, our attorney general. And so the time to accomplish things is now. The other thing that we haven't mentioned yet is that our opponents of LGBT rights have been bringing forth the issue that their religious beliefs should justify discrimination against LGBT people, or not having to comply with civil rights policies. Last November, the United States Supreme Court heard the case. It's called Fulton versus the city of Philadelphia. And we have 3 similar cases to that in Michigan. And the issue there is the city of Philadelphia contracts with different foster care agencies to provide foster services and placement of kids in foster care. And that includes faith-based agencies. And there's a number of faith-based agencies that refuse to work with same-sex couples in violation of the city's civil rights non-discrimination policy. And so the city said, well, if you're going to refuse to comply with our policy, then we're not going to give you a contract to provide foster care services to do that placement. And so these faith-based agencies sued the city of Philadelphia, arguing that they have a right to discriminate, that they should be exempt from civil rights laws. And this case went up to the United States Supreme Court. We know now, as a result of appointments from the Trump administration, there is a 6-3 conservative majority on that court. And the expectation is, even though it's never really been done before, is that the court majority is going to create some kind of religious exception when it comes to LGBT people in terms of complying with civil rights policies or non-discrimination policies. I hope that doesn't happen, but if that's the case, we're going to be dealing with a very significant setback, and you'll have to see what it looks like and under the circumstances. But the idea that you can allow some forms of discrimination against LGBT people when you cite, religious beliefs is incredibly disturbing. Our country is very, our Constitution strongly protects freedom of religion, but our courts have never allowed that freedom of religious belief to be used as a sword to harm other people. And this is one of the first cases of its kind that the court was willing to take up that talks about, that is asking the court to find some sort of exemption, some sort of exception, when you cite a religious belief. In other words, if you can go someplace else that will serve you, then is it okay to say to LGBT people, we won't work with you? I don't know. I hope it's not going to get to that, but there's a great deal, during the arguments, there seemed to be enough justices willing to try to look for some kind of way to carve out an exemption to complying with civil rights laws. So that's going to be, so with all the good stuff, this could be thrown into our laps too, and it could be highly problematic.
Yeah. Well, I hope President Biden can deal with that before it happens.
Yeah, I don't know how much. I think what would happen is if we got a decision like that, it would be up to Congress to kind of create some kind of law that would pass that makes it clear that even if you hold a particular religious belief, if you're engaging in non-religious activity and you're getting a government contract, that you can't discriminate in the name of religion. And we're just gonna have to see how it all unfolds. We probably won't know anything until, it could be up till June of this year. But this is kind of the specter of some of the bad stuff that could be coming down the pike. The other thing we're seeing in other states, not in Michigan, is anti-trans legislation being introduced. Two kinds. One that would criminalize medical providers that provide treatment to transgender youth. In other words, if a doctor prescribed hormone therapy for a transgender person who is under age 18. And the other that would prohibit transgender students from participating in school sports in accordance with their gender identity. Both highly problematic, clearly goes against medical science, factual information, and are discriminatory. But yet we've seen some successful efforts in other states, and hopefully that's not going to come to Michigan.
Yes. Let's hope. What about the parents in that respect? Wouldn't the parents' rights for the child usurp?
Basically what they would be saying, parents, you have a right to consent to medical treatment, but if we say it's illegal in your state, you can't get that medical treatment for your child.
I see. Sure. So they'd have to go to a different state, or
they would have to try to go to another state if indeed, I really believe that kind of law would be, if something becomes law like that, it's going to be challenged in court and probably struck down, because it totally goes against what the medical experts say. Certainly transgender youth should be able to access treatments, including hormone therapy.
Right.
Okay. Anything else to add, or?
No, just, I might sound like a broken record. This is a very exciting time for LGBT rights. It's very important. And I'm so glad that OutCenter is out front. I'm sorry, out front are OutCenter is
Mhm,
doing
yep.
these talks. I'm sorry, because I think it's important that we do remain engaged in what's happening. And like I said, it's a small window period of time in order to make the progress on a number of very important issues to us. So we want to be informed and engaged, and hopefully we'll continue making some progress. And certainly we have a long way to go with Medicaid in terms of making sure that people get their medically necessary treatment covered, particularly the transgender community. And we're going to keep pushing. We're going to keep pushing on that.
One last thing. What do you think allies can do to make sure Medicaid is more equitable and inclusive? And what can the OutCenter do as well? Anything?
Well, I mean, we certainly, I think by telling stories, people who have been discriminated against, who have been denied medical care, I think that can be a real important educational tool. I think allies, we want to have people who are setting our policies, including with our state government. We want to make sure that we're electing and that we're supporting people who are supportive of LGBT issues.
Yes.
I think some of the progress that we've been able to make in terms of Medicaid is because we have a current administration, a current governor who is supportive of LGBT issues. In a different administration where they're not supportive, it's going to be difficult to get those policy changes. So we want to be informed. We want to know where candidates who are running for office, where they stand on these issues. We want to call them on it. And what's your position on this? What are you going to do? And cast informed votes. And we want to share this important information with like-minded people, like-minded allies, so we can speak out on these issues.
Yes, very good.
Great. Great. Okay, that's all of our questions for you, Jay.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate this opportunity. And I want to encourage people, I don't know if we can put it in the chat box, if I could do that. If people have questions, related to Medicaid or having problems, they can contact me at Kaplan at I can't see this now, ACLU mich.org. They can send me an email, and I'll get back to them.
Fantastic.
Wonderful. Thank you for your time.
Anything else, Alex?
Yeah, so thank you so much, Jay. We will make sure that your email is provided when we host this on our website. Also want to remind anyone watching that if you are in need of health insurance and qualify, you can apply for Medicaid at mibridges.gov. And you can apply for Medicaid at any point in time throughout the year.
Yes.
And it is also open enrollment for healthcare.gov until May 15th, as my partner who works for CMS would like me to remind everybody.
Fantastic.
Yes. So open enrollment has been extended due to the pandemic, and you can apply for Medicaid in Michigan at any time in the year. So hopefully, if you're watching and you need this public assistance, you reach out for it and get it. If you have any issues or ever have any questions, you can email Jay and Karen and Kate, our Medicaid team, and we will do our best to assist you. We are all in this 2021 together, and we're going to make it together. So thank you all so much, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.
You too.